Hey, welcome everybody to my channel. This is Iron Flash Gaming bringing you a Pokemon Draft Essentials video. So what that means is if you want to get into the Pokemon Draft community, for example, if you watch GBA, UCL, different leagues like that, and you want to get into your own and you're about to start your league, this is a video that you need to see. And even for those who have experience, this is something you might want to, just pick up whatever may be rusty to you, or maybe learn something new. So stick with us as we go on our list. Okay, so now we're looking at team concepts. So this is broken up into 5 different categories, and this is kind of what style your team's going to be. And this style is based on what you're most comfortable with, what you think your team should be, or depending on what your first few mons are drafted. So for example, hyper offense. If you draft something like a Mega Medicham, you're going to excel with a hyper offensive team. If you draft something like a Mega Sableye, you're going to do very well with a stall team. And then now you can differ around here and there. There's no scenarios that you have to go a certain way, but keep in mind you kind of do want to establish this early and pick up mons that suit your style most. So we're gonna hop on Showdown and look at more of what these concepts are. So if you're a newer player and you don't understand what those concepts are, I'm going to be breaking them down very simply here. So we're going to be looking at hyper offense. So hyper offense is pretty much a bunch of flash cannons, and they mostly depend on items like life orb or focus sash or even scarfers in the back. And so how these teams are won is always creating offensive presence. So there's not really much thinking with these teams as well, and the games go very, very fast, but there often is a lot of critical 50-50s late game, or even potential speed ties with, base 110s, Gengar trying to outspeed a Lottie, etc., etc. So with hyper offensive teams, you're going to usually start off with some sort of hazards that could be sash or sturdy or this or that, and you want to make sure you always keep up your rocks, and the whole rest of your team is supposed to pressure your opponent in not being able to defog or rapid spin. And another thing is we have a Gengar that can switch in to a normal type move, being rapid spin, if that is our best move. So another team concept with this is you have a couple different priority moves here and there, but it's very, very offensive, and it just breaks through any team. So next we're going to be looking at bulky offense, and bulky offense is a little bit different than hyper offense because these mons can actually take a hit. So for example, Azumarill has very good typing, defensively and offensively as well. So it has base 100 attack HP stats, base 80 defenses, and it's very, very solid. So it can switch into things like dragon types quite easily, unless they have maybe a Thunderbolt Lottie or something like that. Now Charizard, as you can see, once again, very good natural bulk, and you can invest a little bit in the HP stat to make up for some of its bulk that it may need here and there. But with something like this, you just kind of set up and try to win. And with these kinds of teams, it is very similar to something like a hyper offense, but you can afford, if you don't get your rocks up with maybe something like a Landorus, you can get it up possibly later in the game, because you have at least a little bit of bulk to take hits, but you're still doing massive amounts of wall breaking. And once again, another thing with bulky offense is a lot more critical on bulky offense than hyper offense is it's a lot more dependent on priority, because they're generally kind of slower. So for example, Bisharp and Azumarill both have priority that really help out this team. So for example, if there's a focus sash mon and you need to knock it out real quick, you have priority to make sure you can handle these type of things. and everything else is very, very offensive. That pretty much being able to take out any defensive walls while still being able to take a hit. Next, we're going to be looking at balance, and balance is most seen in not only formats but in standard league play. So you have something like Hippowdon. Hippowdon is a very, very good wall, and it can hit decently because its stab earthquakes are base 100 move and base 120 attack stat. Not too bad. And it has the instant recovery, which is pretty good on balanced type teams. So the mons that have instant recovery are only going to be Hippowdon and Scizor, and here we go, Wish Protect. And Wish Protect is more seen towards stall and semi-stall, but something like balance, it can help something out like a Tentacruel that may not be able to last, continuously take punishing hits from the special attack. And by having a Wish Protect user, you can bring this back to full, and it will essentially never die if you play it correctly. Now, another thing about this is you still have a lot of offensive threats still going on here. So, for example, you have a breaker right here with Victini, and technically Thundurus doesn't necessarily need a lot of special attack investment in order to wall break, and it has even setup, something that Scizor has. It has setup, and something that does help out something like balance are things like toxic spikes. It doesn't have a fake out user, which we will be talking about with toxic spikes, but it is fine because it will be able to take out the walls, because walls are a little bit tricky for something like balance to take out, other than for Victini and something like Thundurus, because there's no instant power with things like Tentacruel and Hippowdon. But if you get up the spikes, you're going to pressure those walls, and later on, bullet punch sweep or nasty plot, agility sweep, and kind of go from there. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is semi-stall, and there's not really that much of a difference between stall and semi-stall, and it's kind of hard to distinguish the difference between them, but I guess the only real difference is that they should have at least one breaker or something to crack at least a wall or something like that. So another concept with a semi-stall is that Slowbro, it can take any hit in the game, but when it sets up Calm Minds, now it is offensively a pressure powerhouse, and you might not even have any switches into it after it gets a Calm Mind or two. Another thing about stall and semi-stall is you need something to take care of setup mon. So something like Clear Smog, something like Whirlwind, which you can obviously carry on Hippowdon, depending on what your team calls for. So at least with something like this team, you have at least one breaker. Also being able to set up some sort of ability to break through walls. I mean, you're still not investing in special attack or attack, but you can do that easily because of your bulk, and then you just kind of set up and try to take out the walls. But still, with this team, it can take any hit from anything pretty much in the game. So last and definitely no least, hopefully you're not, guys, one of these players, but all of the top guys in OU really use these kinds of concepts, and this is going to be stall, and it's the most hated, but it is possibly the most effective of it all if you play it correctly. So something like stall is very dependent on status. So you have, and it's hazards as well, but you have the Will-O-Wisp user. You can have a Thunder Wave or Toxic right here. Possibly get a Sludge Bomb, Poison, or Sports, kind of spikes and then Whirlwind it out, which is kind of like a stally thing to do because you're trying to kill it with hazards and just really whittling things down, like Seismic Toss. That's just residual chip damage, and then just kind of I mean, this, at least with something like this, it has at least one win condition, Calm Mind user, but you might not even see something like that on all stall teams. Some do and some don't. But stall teams, once again, are very um, longevity type mons that can take hits for days. You have unaware users in Clefable and Quagsire, and you just kind of whirl things around, and you can't kill all of these mons. And in case if something gets low, you have, you know, Wish Protect, or all of every single one of these mons will have some sort of recovery instantly, and it is a nightmare to try to break these. But quick tip, if you do want to know how to break stall, the moment you do break one of these walls, everything else will start to break slowly after. So these are the team concepts. And okay guys, we're looking at Synergized Cores. So this can be described through typing or concepts. We're going to be looking at typing first. So if you see a lot of very successful teams in League formats, they have some sort of type synergy cores. For example, the most common one you're going to see is something like a Dragon Fairy Steel core or a Fire Water Grass core. So what that means is they have a Dragon type user, and so Dragon is weak to Fairy, and then Fairy is weak to Steel, and Steel's not weak to Dragon. Steel kind of beats both of these, but they are pretty much the best typings in the game, and they help each other out. Something like Fire, Water, Grass has been seen since Generation 1. They're the starters, and once again, they cover each other's weaknesses. So if there's a Fire type Mon on your opponent's team, you have the Water type, etc., etc. So here's another fun one that you don't see as often, but it is still very effective, is something like a Fighting Psychic Dark / Ghost core. So you start off with a Fighting Mon, and Fighting Mons are weak to Psychic, and so then you have the Dark to beat the Psychic, and then you have the Fighting to beat the Dark, and they kind of once again check each other. And Fighting, Psychic, and Dark, I mean Ghost can be thrown in there as well, can hit everything from neutral damage. So another thing that we're going to be looking at here, this is where things can get a little bit fun and tricky at the same time. So we have concepts. So first we're going to be looking at different weather teams. You have sunny day teams. So for example, if you have chlorophyll users or anything like that that excels in the sun, you have that option. Another thing is sand teams. Now sand teams are maybe the better ones in League format, because you can have a very simple core in Excadrill and Tyranitar and even Stoutland in the later rounds that can wall break. And the thing about sand is sand rush users in the sand double their speed. Same thing with chlorophyll users, double their speed in the sun. And this can be very, very helpful in leagues, because you can invest a lot more in bulk. If you know what their fastest mon can be, you can outspeed their fastest choice scarf users under the weather. And probably, you know, if it's not sand, then it's no doubt rain is probably actually better than sand, because rain has hydration, rain has swift swim, and other pretty cool abilities. There's also another series of things to consider with weather teams. So for example, if you have a Mega Scizor does very good in rain teams, because another mechanic about sand, rain, and sun teams is that there's secondary effects that you have to consider. For example, rock types get a specially defensive boost in the sands. Rain teams excel with hurricane users. There's 100% accuracy hurricanes, and then there are fire types that are only hit for neutral damage in the rain. Next we have Trick Room. Trick Room is kind of a cool option to have in the back, because it is speed control and the opposite fashion. So if you have a massive wall breaker that's really, really slow, you get them, you know. So these are things like Embors, Mega Camera Up. You're never going to see Mega Camera Up in League format, but something like an X-Cloud, you get them under Trick Room, and things can get very scary very fast. Next, you have Hazard Stacks. So, uh, a very, very simple and effective concept to have full hazards on your team. And if your opponent does not have a reliable way to get rid of hazards, or if you can prevent them from getting rid of the hazards, you go for it. And next is Regenerator Cores. So these are mons that have their regenerator ability. So things like Amoongus, Tornadus, Slowbro. Intimidate Cores. Intimidate Cores are the opposite pretty much of Assault Vest. So it's really, really easy to deal with special attackers, I would say, in League format, but it can be a little bit tricky for physical type attackers unless you have, mons with like Foul Play and Will-O-Wisp and stuff like that. But another thing is Intimidate that can really check things like Dragon Dance users or this or that, because you switch up with your Intimidate users and go from there. Next is Volt Switch U-Turn. This is very, very hard to deal with if you're in the void. For example, if they start hitting Volt Switch and then you switch out, and then they go into their U-turn user, and then they U-turn out, and then they Volt Switch and U-turn and Volt Switch and U-turn, and it can be very, very difficult to get out of there. So that is it for the Synergized Cores. There's others that we can dive in later, but these are just some of the basics. So we saw this a little bit earlier in the concepts, but we're going to be looking at the hazard game, and this is very, very crucial to having success in League format. If you can control the hazard game, you can win games solely off of that. So hazards are, stealth rock users, and so when you have a stealth rock user, you don't want it to be something that is like a Bisharp or a Mew. Technically, they get up stealth rocks and they can learn it, and you can run it sometimes, but you want something that can be a consistent stealth rock user. For example, something like Hippowdon, something that easily can get up stealth rocks every single week. They don't lose anything by running stealth rocks, and kind of go from there. Another thing is have multiple stealth rock users, not just one, because if they predict what your stealth rocker is every single week, they can improvise and kind of go from there. Next is spikes. Spikes are not something you need, but if you have, it can be very, very easy to win games. And spikes, how you're going to run them is you're either going to get up your rocks paired up with spikes, and paired up, if you have a spinner, you run a spinner that week. But if you don't have a spinner, you do not run defog and spikes. It's kind of counterproductive. It's best to get up your rocks, get up your spikes, and allow them to only get up your rocks, and you're still winning the hazards game because you have stealth rocks plus spikes. So next is toxic spikes. And toxic spikes is more situational, because if they have poison type users, or if their team has a lot of levitate users or flying type users, then toxic spikes might not be the thing to go for. But toxic spikes can be useful for wall breaking certain teams. Now, another very good pairing with toxic spikes are fake out users, because you get a residual damage with the toxic spikes, and then you fake them out, and then they're taking fake out damage plus the toxic spikes added up onto it. And then last but not least is sticky webs. And sticky webs is something that you can get in the later rounds for sure. So these are things like, Leavanny and even Galvantula, but you can get other very, very cheap bug type Pokemon that learn sticky web. And what sticky web does is, if you have a massive wall breaker and don't have Trick Room, for example, once again, Exploud or Emboar, and you get up sticky webs, now you can start outspeeding the mons that naturally would outspeed you. And if they're really, really fast because of sticky webs and hit really, really hard, that can be good game right there. And yeah, so now we have hazard removal. So defog and rapid spin. With defog, it is good to have a defogger if you don't want hazards at all. For example, with a Charizard team, you don't want to have hazards at all. And with something like a rapid spin, you may not be weak to something like, you know, stealth rockers or that, you know, with hazard, something like rapid spin. If you're going to get a rapid spin user, it either needs to absolutely go through their ghost type, which I'll explain here pretty soon, or you have to somewhat forfeit, you know, getting up the rapid spin, because rapid spin is not as reliable as defog. But yeah, so now we're going to be looking at how to prevent uh, somebody going for a defog or a rapid spin. If you're facing a team with something like a Mega Pinsir, a Mega Charizard, or something that is weak to rocks, something like a Talonflame, it is essential for you to get up your rocks and keep them up. And so here's a couple ways how to do so. For example, if their only way to get rid of hazards are something like a defog user, having a Defiant user in the back can be very critical. For example, if they decide to defog and you have a Braviary, and if you have a Bisharp, that's a free setup right there without having to do anything. Another thing that is crucial about having a defog user is that generally they're going to be weak to rocks. So you can pressure things like a Zapdos, a Mandibuzz, or this or that, because you just have to get them to 24%. Yeah, 24%, and they're dead. Another thing, if all else fails, is you have a setup mod to really pressure the defog, being able for them to do it or not. So for example, if they have a Mandibuzz and you switch into your Manaphy, you set up a Tail Glow, and they have the decision to either Toxic you or Knock Off or Whirlwind, or they get up a defog. So if they do defog, then you get a free boost, and if they Whirlwind you, you keep up your rocks. So now here are some things how to stop the spin, and this is a lot easier for most teams to do if you have a ghost type. So Gengar is a ghost type, but it's not the most reliable rapid spin blocker. Something like a Gourgeist, a Jellicent, really solid bulky ghost types stops rapid spin. Rapid spin is a normal type move, and if your ghost type walls the rapid spinner, let's say the rapid spinner is an Excadrill, and you have a something like a Gourgeist, a Excadrill can never be able to spin on a Gourgeist because that is the defensive check. Another thing is if you're able to weaken their rapid spin user, and if you have a Rocky Helmet user, especially paired up with Rough Skin Rocky Helmet, you are able to kill them before they remove the hazards. For example, let's just say a Excadrill, once again, who is their dedicated rapid spinner, is at 10%. Stealth rocks are up, and you have a Rocky Helmet user in the back. If they go for a rapid spin, they're going to kill themselves, and because of that, they're not going to be able to get rid of the rocks. Last but not least, how to stop rocks from not staying on their side of the field is you pressure them with having a strong stealth rock user. For example, if we'll keep using it because it works, if their hazard removal is a rapid spinning Excadrill, and if you have something like a Landorus, Landorus beats their spinner. If you have a stealth rocker that beats their spinner, you're always going to keep up rocks, because you get up rocks, and then later in the game they go into their spinner, you go back out into your rocker, and then you get rocks back up, and you keep them for the rest of the game. Coming to a close, we have setup users, and this is something you need to draft. And if you end up drafting a full team of setup users, you can win a lot of games very simply. And setup users can be extremely mindless and just 6-0 teams if played correctly. So these are going to be the more offensive setup users. So these are things like Nasty Plot, Swords Dance, Tail Glow, Hone Claws, and they are usually frail mons, but if they get up a Swords Dance, they're able to break through walls because they double their attack or their special attack. Next are something like Calm Mind or bulky, Calm Minds, bulk ups, curses, and how these work is if you have something like a Clefable or Reuniclus, they start setting up Calm Minds, and unless you're able to crit them, you're not going to be able to break through them, and they just win 6-0 if you cannot kill them. And then last but not least is rock polish or speed boosting into baton pass or agility late game. So if you're going to have a speed boost agility rock polish user, you're going to want to have a breaker on it. So for example, let's just say you have a Kieran Black in the back and you have a Zapdos that has agility baton pass for whatever reason. So you agility with the Zapdos and you baton pass late game into the Kyurem after Kyurem has done massive damage, and you just kind of pick up the remainder of the kills and kind of just win the game from there. But the easiest setup to do, is just set up swords, dances, and nasty plots versus very defensive mons and kind of start wall breaking from there. But another really key thing to do is if you have a win condition, do not use it until late game unless you need to. You don't want to set up first turn because it's kind of a one shot type of thing. So if you blow your load a little bit too early, you're going to be screwed. So hopefully this video is going to help everybody that has seen it, and if you have any suggestions, let me know. Good luck on your guys' draft, and until next time, I'm out. Peace.